Hi, everybody. How are you? I am Vernā Myers, and I am so happy to be here with you for Ask Vernā Live. Some of you may not even be recognizing me with these braids, but this is my little end of summer look. And if I also have a little bit of a summer cold, so I may sound a little nasally, and let's hope I don't have like a major coughing attack. But I'm really here today to hear your comments and your thoughts, and even your questions about being first gen in the workplace. You know, what I find out a lot is that we spend a lot of time when we talk about inclusion and we focus on really important identities like race and gender and sexual orientation and all of those really important identities, religion, you name it, disability. But there's also another identity, which is called first gen. And I have had that experience. You know, I was the first in my family to get like a graduate degree, a law school degree, and then I went into law firms and I went into like private law firms. And believe me, I was so surprised with what I found there. And you know, I remember walking into one of these buildings in Baltimore, and for my entire life, it's not like those buildings didn't exist, right? But they were not relevant to me in my life at all. And I had no one in my family who would ever go up those elevators into those beautiful, gigantic buildings. And then when I was a summer associate, I came into these places and I was like, oh my gosh, this is how people are living. Oh, and the food is free. And it always felt, I don't know about you, but it always felt like, okay, it's just a matter of time before someone comes and takes me out of here and says, oh, excuse me, we've made a mistake. But it was both positive and also challenging not to have had any kind of orientation to these kinds of workplaces, and really having no one in your family or your friend group that you trust who had gone before you. And so a lot of things that I did in that moment in the time, I had to actually figure out on my own. And so I'm wondering like what your experiences were like. I wonder what questions you have about how to meet some of these challenges. So I'm just going to wait a little just to see if some of you will share your questions. We also, if you want to come on live with me, you can do that. But tell me what your experience has been like as a first gen. And also, like, what have you learned? I'll tell you one more story while I'm waiting for you all to ask your questions. You know, I had to do these interviews and in order to get into these various workplaces. And there was always like, if you made it through like the first set of them, then they would take you out to dinner. And at the time, I was dating a man who, were we married by then? Actually, I think we were married. And the two of us were invited to dinner at this really swanky restaurant that I'd never been to before. And it was a fish restaurant, and I love fish. And so the fish came, and I wanted to put lemon on it. And so I saw the little lemon thing, and I picked it up, and it was in this nice little mesh bag. I was like, oh, people got time on their hands here. They got lemons in a mesh bag. And it had a little tie. And I started untying the bag. My husband at the time, he nudged me under the table and he was like, "Brr." And so I'm like, wait, okay, why is he hitting me? Oh, oh, oh. They've solved the seed problem? I had no idea that they had solved the seed problem. I mean, they have these lemons in these little mesh bags, and all you have to do is squeeze, the lemon comes through, juice comes through. I know. It seems ridiculous, but I had never seen anything like that before. And I thought to myself, if I don't know the lemon thing, what other things do I not know? And so part of, I think, first gen is also quickly related and very closely related to socioeconomic class and exposure. And so I wonder if you all are also experiencing that, where you're saying to yourself, like, if I don't know this, what else do I not know? And why don't I know this? And like, at what disadvantage? Oh, we have a question. Yes. Vernā, how do young professionals navigate being talked down to in the workplace to the point where they start feeling dismissed or even disrespected? Wow. Very good question. Okay, first and foremost, always, you know what Vernā is going to say. You got to go inside. Go inside first. So first, you have to ask yourself, am I good with who I am? Do I have confidence? Now, you might say that this is like a chicken or egg problem, sorry. But the real problem is, like, what do you think about yourself? And I heard one of my friends say this, and I'm going to try to remember who it was, Kiwi, on one of our webinars. She said, all of us are worthwhile. There's no question about our worth as human beings. And we still often are in the role of having to prove our value. Everybody has to prove their value. And so the confidence starts in you first. So checking in yourself. If you are just one of those people who are easily upset because you haven't worked out in yourself your own worth, then this is going to bother you even more. If you're a little bit more stable and grounded, then you might think to yourself, okay, what is this person really trying to say to me? Are they really trying to talk down to me, or am I just interpreting it that way? Then my next go-to thing always, after you check in with yourself and then you give people the benefit of the doubt, the third thing really is to ask a question. Often I say, what do you mean by that? And I have also learned to do this thing. You know, I just make a face. And what I don't try to do is retaliate, because in most cases, you are not in the power position. And so the question allows you to really, understand a little bit more where people are coming from. But I also know that feeling of being talked down to. I mean, sometimes as a consultant, I would go to these really expensive, prestigious, like very like white shoe, like law firms is what they call them. And I could immediately tell that I would need to prove myself before people would actually be listening to me. And sometimes, no matter what my record was, no matter where I went to school, whatever. And I remember one time I was talking to my friend who was a partner, and she was also, my partner in my company. And we were wondering why we were getting so much static from this particular company. And she goes, what if it's because we're women? Or what if it's because we're Black? And we were like, right. What if it's because we're first generation? What if it's because we don't have that same kind of veneer and that shininess and that kind of comfort? You can get through that. And by the way, some of it is not logical. So there are certain things you can't change, right? You are who you are, you come from where you come from. But one of the ways to navigate that is to engage, not make assumptions, and also get mentors. Mentors have been so helpful to me to say, like, I'm having this experience. People are talking down to me. I don't feel like people are listening to me. What might I do? And that mentor usually has much more information about that dynamic and can help to navigate you, help you to navigate. So I hope that's helpful. After what you've done, have you ever had experiences like that where you actually engaged and then you were able to move through and navigate that experience. I mean, I certainly have had people where initially they weren't really there for me, but I developed a relationship and I showed up consistently and I asked important questions and I was always prepared. And then little by little, I'm like, oh, wow, remember when we first met? Right. And then there is a way to generate the kinds of, I think, relationships that stand up under some of the presumptions and stereotypes that we nevertheless have to fight through. As a first generation corporate professional in a large corporate environment, I find there are often significant challenge around not knowing what you don't know. The uncertainty of who to approach with those critical, what should I do in this scenario questions can feel overwhelming. What resources would you recommend? And do you have any advice for navigating these situations? Okay, brilliant question. And I know exactly what you're talking about. So the good news is that, okay, so there are two realities at the same time right now. Right now in our workplaces, especially given this past year and all the backlash, we are super cautious. Understandably, we are fearful. And a lot of times people don't want to talk about anything. Like there could possibly be a problem or like buy into stereotypes. However, somehow we do have to find the courage to continue to make connections and relationships. So one is just look around, find people who you think actually exhibit the kind of character, the kind of openness, the kind of helpfulness. I remember when I was at Netflix, I was just so overwhelmed and pleased by the idea that people had about helping you. I remember one of my first or 2 days, I was like in the kitchen, and then I was coming out looking for where to go. And this person was like walking by me and stopped and was like, do you need to know where you're going? Do you need some help? And some of us will be like, no, because we don't want to seem like we don't know where we're going or what we need. But I was like, yeah, I'd love some help. And that person led me to where I needed to go. So first of all, is that the culture of your workplace? If not, I understand it. But also I do see as leaders, having been a leader, I see leaders asking people if they need help, but then not actually, people not going with them. And I understand, like people like, well, what if I say need help and then that's going to be used against me? Okay. So that's one, is look around, observe, find the people who do seem helpful. The second thing is there's so much good stuff online. So you could probably just go to the Google and say, how do I manage this? Or how do I navigate that? LinkedIn videos, those are also really good. Finding and developing mentors, as I mentioned before. I would say that there are also probably associations, often, and ERGs. Like the nice thing about ERGs is that you have multiple levels and experiences and departments in ERGs, and you can actually ask people who you feel comfortable with for some advice. So I think that's also important. And get several pieces of advice. Don't just go on one, because sometimes maybe it's a different department, or maybe it's a different leader, or maybe it's a different situation. So those are the things that I would suggest. First gen mentors. Let me tell you about mentorship that I've discovered. To get mentors are like anybody. They are attracted to potential. They are attracted to earnestness, hard work, humor. You have to make yourself attractive. You can't go around saying, can you be my mentor? I mean, nobody would do that, but I have noticed in people's attitudes, and often it's because they're so fearful that they don't come off as somebody that an individual wants to bring along. So you also have to ask. Sometimes we think someone's going to see us and come pick us up. That happens a little bit. Does happen sometimes, but it is also often you have to go to a person and you have to say what it is that you would like them to do. I remember one time I was working as the executive director of a large consortium of law firms that were working on issues of diversity. And there was a white gentleman there that I had observed. He was a partner and he was brilliant. And I was like, I need this guy. I need this guy who's going to help me navigate this whole structure. And I went to him and I said, do you think you would be willing to be my mentor? I said, he was like, well, what would you be asking me to do? You got to be ready with this. I was like, I want you to help me understand how white men are thinking about these issues. And he was like, I think I can do that. And I said, and I want you to tell me where the way I'm thinking is wrong or different than I might have understood. And he was like, yeah, I think you can do that. And I said to him, I said, you are the smartest, most sort of like your arguments make so much sense. I want to be able to do that as well. And so he was gracious and he helped me. So I will also say be brave enough to approach the person, but also be somebody who can give, not just take. I hope that helps. And I'm not coughing, which I feel so excited about. I shouldn't even have said that, but whatever. Other thoughts, questions that you might have? One of the things I think first gen folks have to recognize is while they don't know how everything operates, and as a result, people may underappreciate or value them, you have so much to bring. Like your perspectives, the where you come from, how you think about things. In fact, there are a lot of studies that would suggest that first gen folks work harder, are more resilient, can adjust more easily to certain kinds of environments. You don't need to feel less than because you haven't been somewhere before, right? It's just a matter of getting used to an environment and then finding your way to contribute. First generation can have lots of expectations from others and from oneself. How you decide when to pause, recharge, or simply stop climbing the ladder. Thank you, Nubia. Great question. And this is, again, you start inside with that, right? Sometimes I think my experience was as a first generation, I must succeed. I must succeed. I'm the only one. I'm the first one. I mean, I remember I left my law firm after like 2.5 years, and everybody was like, well, you should really hang in there. And I was like, I don't think this is the best use of me. And I had to like step out of it in order to refine myself. I was just working so hard at being successful. And I remember saying to my mother, was going to leave the law firm. And then my mom saying, but I mean, you're a lawyer, like you went to law school, like, why are you doing that? Right. And so you also, the reason why I say you have to go inside, because you're always needing to ask yourself, who am I? Why do I exist? Why was I born? What are my gifts? What's the best use of me, right? And that's just got to be a question you're asking all the time in all sorts of places, because sometimes things are going to be difficult, but it's okay. It's just a matter of time before you're sailing. Other times, the difficulty is a suggestion that you're in the wrong place. And I am not the person who can tell you that. Only you will know that. But it is also great to get advice because you need perspective. That's the one thing you don't have when you are first generation. In fact, people who leave their first job and go to a second job are almost always more successful with the second job because they have learned from their first job, right? And they have more confidence and they have perspective. So I think the hardest part for first gen, because you're new, is the perspective that you need. So that's why it's important to look for folks who you like and you see what they're doing and you admire, and try to engage them. And maybe they're not going to be your mentor. Maybe you just want to have, like, because sometimes, I mean, people ask me if I can mentor them. I'm like, I really can't. I just don't have the time. I can do a thing. I can go to a lunch. I can do a phone call. I can do a 20-minute, video, and I can dump everything I have for you. And I maybe can make some connections for you. So it doesn't have to be a person that you are going to engage for a long period of time. It could be, I mean, I've had advice given to me in 1 second, one lunch, one phone call that has changed my whole perspective on things. So I hopefully that's good advice. I've always heard it's not what you know, it's who you know, but I find it challenging to maintain relationships once we're no longer on the same team or they leave the company. How do you personally stay connected and nurture your network over time? Or do you think it's okay to let some connections fade? Such a great question. This is the other thing. I think that those who have connections and who have been in the workplace for a while, they take this totally for granted, that there's a person that they can pick up, that they can text, and they just know people. And I remember coming back home to Baltimore several years ago and talking to my nieces and nephews, and they were saying to me, like, it's impossible. Like, there's nothing we don't know anybody. I mean, that's the thing around class, because you get into various places and groups and colleges and clubs, and those are all networks that you can rely on. So you're kind of starting at a deficit often when you're the first generation, or your parents never did any of this or whatever. That doesn't mean that you can't have these relationships and keep them. Now, there's certain people who, I mean, maybe you don't need to keep up with, but there are ways to just write people's names down before they go, and they leave. You're like, hey, what's your forwarding information? A lot of people do that. Or, for me, for example, I will meet a person in New York or California, and I just have a document, and I'm just like, if you're in New York, these are the people to remember to talk to. If you're in California, these are the people to remember to talk to. And so little by little, I have amassed my network. Now, the hard part too is, do you call on people, right? And you kind of have to get used to that. Like, feel okay with calling people and saying, I just did this the other day for someone else. Sorry, they wanted to get a job at a place that I had worked. And they're like, do you know anybody who I could talk to that gets me past all this resume and this AI? And I said, I think I do. And I found that person's name and I connected them. So I think that it does take some intentionality, right? And I think that's the thing that often we don't realize, that you have to intend to do this. It feels kind of weird, and you feel kind of like, oh, am I using people? But people don't mind. Like, people don't mind you calling them, I find. Especially if you had a relationship with them and they really like you, they're like, sure, absolutely, like that kind of thing. So yeah, you have to intentionally create, like, you got to write down stuff. You got to, you guys don't have Rolodexes anymore, but luckily we have these phones and you can actually put things in folders, etc. So hopefully that's helpful. What are the best ways to support first-gen employees? Do you think it's different if the person who is supporting is also first-gen? That's interesting. Thank you, Monique. First of all, first-gen people are looking to be, not everybody, but a lot of us are looking to be seen and acknowledged and listened to, not presumed, right? We don't need a lot of assumptions. But we do need openness, and we do need friendliness, and we do need helpfulness. And so, for example, if you see somebody going the wrong way and you're like, oh, they just don't understand, that's not how you do it, tell them. Now, they might get defensive, but hopefully something I said earlier would mean that they remember to give people first the benefit of the doubt, right? But also what we've learned is that you actually say to people, I'm telling you this because I really want to see you succeed. And this is an area where I have seen people kind of fall before, and I don't want that to happen with you. So that's one way to support. The other thing is it different from first generation? Look, here is good and bad. I've seen good and bad. I've seen good in that folks are like, girl, come on over here. Let me tell you about the linen, right? Or whenever you leave, make sure you do this, or this person that. Like, I didn't know that. And you can really accept what they're saying because they've had to get through and navigate, right? This would be really great advice. The other thing I see on the other side, the negative side, is like giving advice that's way too tight. It's way too judgmental. It's like, if I were you, I would not wear that. I would change my hair, and I would never say that to anyone. And you're kind of like, really? I mean, I understand that's how you survived, but that might not be right for me. And also, it's too much of trying to be accepted by conforming. So I've seen both of those things. I've seen women, this is kind of my pet peeve. I've seen women, and I get it. I totally get it. They're like, don't you ever cry at work. Never cry at work. And I'm like, okay, I get why you're saying that, because then you will be perceived as like not strong and not confident or whatever. But to me, the advice would be like, girl, you have every right to cry. Just go in the bathroom. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's not promote the madness that is not actually about humanity. Like, something happened. It was really upsetting. You are having the feelings you're having. And also here's possible impact if people are aware, but also come be with me, or come cry in my office, or something like that. To me, that feels like better advice. And so I've seen sometimes we give too hard and critical feedback to people who we perceive to be just like us, without giving them the tools to be free and open and confident, whatever. I mean, you may have a different opinion about that, and it certainly does depend on circumstances, but that's one of the pet peeves I've had just becoming an advisor. I'm like, I know it's hard. Like, we don't have to pretend it's not hard, because they want us to pretend that way. Take it for what it's worth. It's just my opinion. In fact, I do remember also, what about this? I was probably 25. No, I was older than that. I was probably 30 or whatever. And I got a secretary assigned to me, and she was probably like 50. I was like, how do I give a person who is older than me my like rules and orders? I mean, I was raised to respect people who were older than I was. And there was also a racial difference and a class difference, like an educational class difference. And I was just like, how in the world do I manage this? And it was kind of funky for a while, but I decided that I did need to play the role that I was given, which is I was this person's boss. So they needed to have I need to have clarity so that they could have clarity. But then ultimately also, I treated them with great respect, and that relationship became quite powerful and positive. So I don't know if people have had that experience in like having that serious culture clash where you're just like, no, but I'm supposed to be like really respectful and not boss an older person around. So sometimes that's about age, and sometimes that's about generation, and sometimes it's about culture. But those are also areas that I've had to navigate. How we doing out there? Any more questions? I really appreciate the questions that people have asked thus far. It's not easy, but I want to say that so many, and I think I want to just end with this by saying, don't discount what you have to offer because things aren't necessarily smooth. There is so much to learn, which is exciting, and there is so much for you to contribute. So hang in there, get the mentors that you need, find the resources that are available. And if you are a leader who is trying to support somebody with who's first gen, ask them how they're doing, what they would need, any concerns, and help them to have the resources that they would need to be successful. Thank you. Thanks for coming to Ask Vernā Live. Thrilled to be here with you. And I made it through without a coughing attack, which I truly appreciate. All right, everybody, take care of yourselves.